So this is very important, something that I wanted to mention before I introduce our panelists. This is an issue actually that is very close to my heart on one side because I'm being exposed to childhood obesity, and when I was invited to be the moderator of this issue, I could have been more happy to do. As the world recovers from recent food and financial crisis, nearly 1 billion people remain hungry. And it's incredible that while that happened, another 1 billion people are overweight. That is something that just is incredible. So for our panelists to open this discussion, we have Mark Arnoldy. He's the founder of NepalNUTrition. Did I say that right? Please have a seat. We also have Ellen Gustafson. She is the founder, executive director of the 30 Project. Hey, Ellen. Welcome. And last but not least, Patel, fellow Institute for Food and Development Policy, Food First. Welcome. Thank you so much. So let's begin this question. This is how it's gonna work, guys. We're gonna have a discussion for about 35 minutes, and then we're gonna open a Q&A discussion for about 12. And then, which is something that I'm really looking forward to, is we're gonna be with you guys in the tables, and we're gonna create discussions among yourselves, and let's find solutions. Let's see between yourselves, let's pick one person that is gonna be the speaker of solutions, and what things do you think are the best and most important that you learn from our panelists, okay? So let's begin. The first question is for Rach. Who really decide what we eat and how we think about food? And what does this mean for raising food prices?
Hello. Oh, it's working. I mean, a lot of the way that we think about food comes to us through ways that we're largely unaware of. I mean, we're brought up with a great deal of sort of negative things and sort of negative ways of thinking about food, thinking of food mainly instrumentally. And that's due to the power of food corporations, I have to say. Worldwide, for every $500 that's spent promoting junk food, only $1 is spent promoting food that is actually good for you. And that seeps into our consciousness in a range of ways. And that also prevents us from thinking clearly about how to change food. Too often we surrender our imaginations to food corporations. And so if we do that, then we end up thinking that, well, you know, the way to solve the global sort of crisis of obesity or of hunger is to let the food companies take care of nutrition. But if we do that, then we end up with sort of perverse things like Diet Coke Plus. If you're familiar with Diet Coke Plus, it is the regular Diet Coke, but with added vitamins and minerals, vitamins, I suppose they are as well, and somehow that this is going to solve the global crisis of obesity and of by having a drink that already tastes like a chemistry set with extra chemicals added in it. But of course, that's not the way to solve hunger. That's not, I mean, really, one of the dangers in the way that we think about food and hunger is that we neglect to think of it as a political problem. And the minute we surrender that idea that it's a political problem is the minute we surrender really the most powerful ways of addressing hunger. I mean, we live in a world where there are 1 billion people who are overweight and 1 billion people who are starving. That's not something that Coke can fix. That's, asking Coke to fix that is like asking the iceberg to fix the Titanic. We're looking at and we need to be thinking much more about political change than the kind of change that you can just supplement through the food system that we have at the moment.
Thank you, Rach. Thank you so much. Ellen, you founded an organization to change the global food system. Can you tell us about your project, the 30 Project? How did this get started?
Well, first of all, I'm very ambitious, clearly, if I want to change the global food system. But I first started a company about 4.5 years ago that some of you may know called Feed. And we sell bags that say feed on them that feed hungry kids around the world, which is an incredibly important thing to do. And especially the way Feed does it is we fund school meals around the world, which is a wonderful solution to the current problem of hunger today. But you heard me say I founded it 4.5 years ago. And one thing that was incredibly frustrating is that 4.5 years later, I saw the numbers of the hungry rise. And so I realized that just giving this particular type of funding to school feeding might be something I was going to be doing 4, 14, or even 40 years down the line. And maybe that wasn't necessarily going to be changing the underlying problems that were causing hunger. Around the same time, actually this time last year, I was on a plane back from California. I live in New York, and I was reading Raj Patel's book. Huge plug for his book. It's called Stuffed and Starved, and he did not pay me to say this. And while I was reading his book, I was actually preparing also for my 30th birthday, and I wanted to have a big party, let's be honest, but I wanted to do something really important at the party. So I thought, oh, should I provide 30,000 school meals to kids? What should I do? While I was reading his book, I noticed a really interesting stat around 1980, which is that after the 1970s oil crisis, when oil got really expensive, a lot of small farmers in America had to get out. There was a massive consolidation of agriculture in our country. Well, when I started to look at other data around 1980, a lot of interesting things popped up, like we've reduced our overseas development assistance in agriculture by 85% since 1980. And in 1980, GM crops became patentable. And around 1980, high fructose corn syrup started entering the food supply. And I realized that, wow, similar things like a lack of development assistance in agriculture, which ends up leading to more hunger, and this new product, high fructose corn syrup, that makes really, really, really cheap, really bad for you food, happened around the same time in the last 30 years. So I kind of came to this idea of, hey, if it's taken 30 years to get this bad, maybe with all the energy there is in the world around improving the food system, we can say in the next 30 years, let's make it better. And I'm sure I'll talk more about it, but that's really how it started.
Absolutely, we'll get back to it. Mark, can you tell us about ready-to-use therapeutic food? Can you say it for me, please? I think you're going to do a better job than I do.
Sure. And I promise Raj is not paying us, but Raj's book actually played
I think something is going on in here, guys. What do you think? I think something's going on in here.
Checks in the post, guys.
No, but seriously, Raj's book played a really central role in the development of my thinking about this particular issue. My work is focused in Nepal. I was passing through Delhi, and I picked up his book from a street vendor, actually, in Delhi, and I read it. And what I want to say from the onset is that, to me, this is a social justice issue for populations, both vulnerable populations that we're talking about today. I deal with one end of the spectrum, people that have too little food or improper nutrition that are, as a result, wasting. And our particular population is children in Nepal. So real briefly, ready-to-use therapeutic food. It's a fancy name for fortified peanut butter. Someday it may be made from lentils and other ingredients. Right now it's peanuts. So it's a fortified peanut butter. It was developed in the mid-1990s, and it was really, really an important development, because before the mid-1990s, if you're a mother who had an acutely malnourished child, you were forced to travel very long distance to an inpatient treatment facility, stay there from anywhere to 4 to 8 weeks with your child. And this was a very high opportunity cost for mothers. So most mothers weren't accessing treatment. And actually, specifically to Nepal, when I stepped into Nepal and got interested in this work, only 1% of children with severe acute malnutrition had access to treatment. And that's because they were relying on an inpatient model. Mothers had to travel 10 hours, often by foot, or horrendous bus rides that are unsafe, or on roads that are often impassable. So it just wasn't a practical solution. And you know, this particular issue needs a medical treatment. So RUTF is a new form of this treatment, and it allows you to flip the system on its head. So previously I would say, you know, the treatment model was failed, and now you flip that treatment model on its head, and you bring treatment to the community. You can treat children in the home with this product. And so that's allowed for dramatic expansion in the number of children that can be treated.
Oh, amazing. As a chef, believe me, I love that. Raj, I have another question for you. Based on your experience and exposure as a food activist, what seems to be the biggest challenge?
I mean, I do think that the biggest challenge is thinking that that fighting hunger is a technical issue. Because and in a sense, of course, our hearts reach out, as they should, when we see people going hungry around the world. And our initial reaction must be, well, clearly there's just not enough food around. We must grow more food in order to feed people. But that mistakes the reason people are going hungry right now. I mean, look right here in America, where we have 50 million of our fellow citizens who are food insecure. 50 million Americans. And around the world, as I say, 1 billion people have less than, 1,900 calories a day. And initially we might think, well, the problem must be that there's just not enough food around. But actually the problem is a political one. It's a question about power. And I mean, here's an example. I mean, I just got back from Malawi, where there's an initiative to grow a lot more corn, and corn is one of the staple foods in Malawi. And so there's this initiative has happened, and more corn is being grown. And you would think, well, surely that's fighting hunger. But the problem is that you need to ask about the relations of power around that. So, for example, who is it that harvests the corn? It's women. And what is it that women are also doing? Well, they're carrying the water, and they are bringing firewood, and they are cooking meals in the home, and they are breastfeeding. And so sometimes having more food in the fields means poorer nutritional outcomes at home, because women have to stop breastfeeding early in order to start to bring in the corn. And then, of course, once the corn is brought in, if the power relations in the home are not met, then men will go out and just sell the corn and drink the profits away. And so the problem is not merely that there is insufficient food, but rather that the power relations around that food are being glossed over. And that's why when I one of the organizations I work with called La Via Campesina, the peasant way, is an organization of peasants and of landless workers and of farmers, including the National Family Farm Coalition right here in the US. And their vision is an idea of food sovereignty, of us taking control of our food system. But to do that, we need to embrace politics as well as new technologies and new ways of thinking about things. And that's why their motto is that food sovereignty is about an end to all forms of violence against women. Food sovereignty about an end to all forms of violence against women. And if we're serious about tackling hunger and tackling the sort of root causes of why there is hunger in the world today, and 60% of the people going hungry in the world today are women or girls, if we're serious about that, then we need to think about the violence, not only domestic violence, that's horrifically important, but also the structural violence that exists that prevents equal access to food in the home, but also to access to resources beyond the home. And that's, I think that is the real barrier that hobbles our imagination, is being reluctant to think about the politics as well as the technology that we need to feed the world. Excuse me.
I'm with you. Ellen, what are the give us two or three major changes to the food system in the last 30 years that have impacted the world's health?
Yeah, I mean, I think I talked about a couple of these before. GM crops became patentable in 1980. We decreased our overseas development assistance in agriculture and high fructose corn syrup. But actually, when you look at other numbers, everyone talks about the obesity epidemic being this 30-year problem. Since 1980, it's gone way up. Well, and again, like I said, like I learned in Raj's book, this consolidation of agriculture created a culture of, instead of just sort of small farmers that we might think of, in the political sense as the farm lobby, it's really become gigantic corporations. And what a lot of people don't know, and what actually Mark's organization is addressing quite well, is that most food aid is corn and soy. It's U.S. excess that's being sent overseas, U.S. corn and soy on U.S. ships that are being fed to people around the world, which is a very necessary thing to do when we're talking about an acute starvation period that people go through in a time of crisis. But that's not what's necessarily happened. In the last 30 years, we've allowed people to become, quite frankly, addicted to this corn and soy internationally in the same way as our diet is quite frankly, addicted to it here at home in the United States. So in looking at these statistics in the last 30 years, another interesting rise is, and this is something that no one likes to talk about as well, but anorexia has risen in the last 30 years. It's harder. I got into this partially because as a young woman, it's hard to just get up in the morning and find food to eat that's not going to make you, crazy and worry every second of the day that you're not going to fit into your jeans anymore. And I think, we're not really looking holistically, well, we are, but a lot of the rest of the world is not looking holistically at the way all of these different problems that touch upon food are related to the same causal and the same systemic problems that underpin our food system. And you know, I think in looking at the obesity trajectory alone and mirroring that with the hunger trajectory around the world, it's incredible to see that until now, no one's really kind of shaken us up and said, hey, these two things are exactly the same problem, and we need to have the exact same solutions to fix them.
Absolutely, absolutely. And one of the things that I always envision is that food, it has such a personal relationship with a human being, because not only affects your personality, but also your self-esteem. So it takes, you know, the relationship goes so further to just the food and actually the problems that we encounter socially. Mark, is your model a sustainable solution? Will the work continue when you leave Nepal? And how far would you take this intervention?
Sure. I think that's a great question. I want to first kind of nip this notion of sustainability at the bud a little bit. I think we all have to be careful when we start using terms like sustainability and scale without a lot of thought put behind them. In my particular opinion, I think sustainability has become quite a flimsy concept. And what I mean is that, okay, so we're working in a situation where I wouldn't advocate necessarily for financial sustainability is the key point of focus, because actually they aren't providing payment at point of care. We're dealing with some of the most vulnerable populations in the entire world, children who are on the brink of death, in some of the most impoverished families in one of the poorest countries in South Asia. So there's no fee for service model for this kind of work. So what does sustainability mean? I mean, it means we have to set ourselves up, we have to develop the infrastructure for long-term engagement, to say we will be there with you in solidarity to provide this treatment. Because quite frankly, it's a moral imperative. And so I like to think of our work in that regards. But to address some of the more traditional notions of sustainability, I want to focus on three quick things that we've done. So I was a student when I started. Literally 2 years ago, I was in your seat. I pretty much only had an idea. Since that time, the organization has really flourished, and I'm not going to take any credit at all for that. I'm going to take credit from some advice that I received here. And I know many of you have wonderful ideas, and here's what I'm going to encourage you to do. Consider whether or not you really need to start an organization to make an impact. Think about leverage. Can you leverage your experience, your expertise, your energy, your time, your financial resources from starting an organization or from a partnership approach? We work through a partnership approach. And so when I leave, it will succeed, and it will be sustainable, quote unquote, because I left for over a year already. I started this my junior year. I took a year off. I had to go back to school and finish. And we partnered with a highly successful, credible Nepali organization that's run by one of the Nepali Ashoka Fellows, one of the top social entrepreneurs in the country. So please think about a partnership model. And the second and third piece of that, real quickly, I just want to, again, kind of show some very tangible examples about how students can make an impact. As a result of some exposure at CGIU in 2009, one of my old high school friends got back in touch with me. So in terms of thinking about financial sustainability, it is hard to fundraise consistently. It's very tiring. But my friend started an apparel company called 5 Pound Apparel. It's quickly becoming one of the most successful apparel companies in my hometown, Southwest Missouri. For every shirt they sell, they donate 5 pounds of peanut butter product through our program in Nepal. So that's a very innovative business started by a junior at Missouri State in Springfield, Missouri. Okay, so I know all of us in this room can do something similar. And the last piece, real quick, is that there's another classic example here, and this addresses both sides of this issue. Another case is a peanut butter company called Nutrients. We produce a nutritionally superlative peanut butter here in the U.S. You sell it. That's much more healthy than the peanut butter you buy here. And at the same time, part of that profit comes and funds the purchase of this ready-to-use therapeutic food in Nepal. So be creative when you think about sustainability. Don't let it become a flimsy concept, and work through partnership.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I think are very important, thank you very much. That's amazing. That's amazing. Is that when you create a system that works and you implement, then when you're not there, you should be able to continue. The system works. What you put in place works. So that's amazing. Let's go back to Raj. And I think I wanna address a little bit your recommendations. And there are some students here today who are now wondering how they can get involved in addressing these issues. So what will be your advice?
I think the sort of metric of if we're doing things right is that we're accountable to a community. And if we are doing things right, then the chances are we've been called out, and that the community whom we serve feels powerful enough to talk back to us and tell us this isn't working. And when you've hit that point, when the community for whom you work feels empowered enough to be able to tell you, actually, mistakes are made, and here's how we're going to fix them. That's the moment when you know you've arrived. And so for me, there's a really incredible example of that in American history that's responsible for feeding a great number of people. And the organization that I think is really, really exciting is one that both addressed the fact that there is a dignified emergency among the poor. I think we all agree that right now, of course, we must feed the poor, and it is a moral imperative, and I think that's absolutely clear. But we also must recognize that allowing hunger to persist is also morally bankrupt. And what we need is to address the short-term crisis, but address the long-term solution. One of the organizations that I'm really excited by and learning from at the moment is the Black Panthers. The Black Panthers started a school meals program, a school breakfast program in the late 1960s. And it was immensely successful. It was open to all black and poor kids to come in and take as much food as they wanted and needed. Often it was the only meal that they got. It was set up because the Black Panthers organized within the community and were told that this was what was necessary. And so they set up this survival program, and it did fantastically well. At one point, they were feeding more people than the state of California through these survival programs. But it wasn't just a Band-Aid. They recognized, as some food banks now do, that the idea of a food bank is sort of morally disreputable. Because, yes, we must feed the poor, but a community that needs a food bank is a community that allows hunger to flourish, and we mustn't have that. And so what they had was a vision of survival, these survival programs, pending revolution. And I do want to use that word. I want us to think big. Survival pending revolution. And what they had was the idea that ultimately, in the world in which they lived, there wouldn't be a need for a food bank. It's an idea that's actually flourishing right now. There's a place called The Stop. It's a food bank in Toronto, in Canada. And their vision, again, is to put themselves out of business. And so if you're thinking about sustainability, for example, think about whether the world needs your organization in the long term. Yes, absolutely, we must feed the poor and the hungry right now. But I think that the vision ultimately is to be accountable in the way that we work, so that one day we won't need to worry about poverty at all. And holding that vision of utopia in our hearts and working towards it concretely is something that I think we need to dream big. And that's something from what I've heard today and the initiatives that have already been set up, that's something that many people here are working towards, and it's an honor to be here.
Thank you so much, Raj. I would like to see how that initiative also applies for obesity and taking it not only globally from this country, something that definitely takes us in so many ways, and people are dying from it. So it's just incredible. Ellen, I think I'm going to go with the same question, is what would be your recommendations for the students that want to be innovators of these ideas? How would you advise them how to start creating this idea and how to implement them?
Thank you, yeah. Well, first thing, and I think you guys will probably all recognize this, and I can say this because I went to college 10 years ago, and 10 years ago, this would not have been the most popular session. And this year, I think it is. I think
check it out.
Numbers it is.
We have standing people in the back.
What that means is like, this is the hot, sexy zeitgeist of now. I mean, and I don't mean that in a weird way. I mean, this is an issue because it's not sexy, but this is a really now, today, important, urgent issue. And it's amazing to be educated on an issue that's incredibly urgent and that has a lot of energy behind it while it's happening. So think about that, as you're kind of deciding what causes and what issues you stay engaged with throughout your career, because it's a real opportunity right now to address food system issues. Two things. One, and this is something that I think is a really interesting, dirty secret of the food movement. The title of this session kind of has a suggestion of a paradox. And when you look in Washington, the most important piece of legislation that any of us, are affected by, because every single thing that will ever be in front of our faces to eat is a direct cause of, or direct, effect of this legislation, is the Farm Bill. And one thing that people don't realize about the Farm Bill is that certainly it's not just about farms, it's about every single piece of food that both in America and overseas, trade, food aid, school feeding, all of it. But what's an unbelievable dirty secret of the food movement is that every year when this legislation comes up, the people that are fighting hunger in this country, food banks like Raj talked about, and our traditional food aid, not the groundbreaking work that Mark is doing, those two organizations, if you think about it, what do food banks ask for? They ask for canned food. And what's the stuff that we send overseas? It's corn and soy. Big Food and Big Ag have an incredible long-term relationship with hunger organizations. And it's out of need, and I'm not saying that's not something that's important today, because we're talking about feeding people who are going hungry, 50 million in America. But there's a political relationship between Big Food and Big Ag and hunger organizations. Quite frankly, there's political cover that hunger organizations offer Big Food and Big Ag. On the other side, the reality in Washington is that in the last Child Nutrition Reauthorization Act last fall, the organizations that were fighting for food stamps for hungry people were fighting against organizations that were fighting for the 6-cent increase in school lunches. What that's showing you is that there's literally two edifice or groups of anti-hunger versus anti-obesity, and that's something that I think is really important to break in the 2012 Farm Bill and going forward, and that's something that I'm directly working on in the 30 Project, is getting these two sides at the city level to sit down and say, we know you want to fight hunger, and we know there's organizations in this city that are trying to fight obesity, and quite frankly, you're both trying to get people better access to nutritious foods. It's the same solution, and you have to look for the commonalities between those two solutions and find ways to work together. So there's two ways I think you guys can work at in your local communities, whether it's at your school community or in your home community. Number one is try to find ways that you can link up people and organizations and people on campus who care about hunger with people and organizations that care about obesity. And if we can all be helpful in letting those two sides realize the commonalities, we can really break a massive political problem that we have in fighting both issues. The way I argue that is the best way to do it is to have dinner. So my organization, the 30 Project, is literally all about, let's get people together around the table for the sole purpose of talking about food. Because when do you have dinner parties and talk about the food? You might talk about the fact that it tastes good, but you don't talk about where it comes from. You don't talk about where you bought it. You don't talk about the farmers. You don't talk about the farm workers. You don't talk about the immigration problems in the food. You don't talk about the calorie content, the subsidies, any of it, right? My simple ask is if everyone in this room who really cares about these issues could have a dinner with the sole purpose of talking about food, we could really change the world.
Absolutely, absolutely, I second that. Let's go back to basic, guys. And what she's saying, I mean, I love your idea of sitting at the table, because I think that we have sometimes, some of us, have a misperception of quantities, have a misperception of what we really need to eat in order to to be healthy and eating right. So let's go back to the basics of what we should be eating. And I think that goes both ways. Goes to the people that are having problems with obesity, and definitely with people that also are fighting malnutrition. So I think that let's go back to the base. Let's see what we're eating on the plate. And I think that what you just said is just right on. Mark, I'm gonna close this session. We have a few more minutes for you to close this. Again, in order for you guys to have as much information of how to come up with innovative ideas, based on your commitment, what will be the advice that you will give our students here today that want to launch some kind of commitment or some type of ideas, and give us also a little bit of advice in the challenges that we can find day to day in trying to implement those ideas.
Sure. I commented just briefly, I think the partnership approach is key. I want to take one step back and take a stab at their question as well. I want to just add one thing. I think, Raj brings out a point that we have to aspire towards this utopia. No doubt we are in dystopia. But the point is here, we can't afford to have our generation, the people in this room right now, be disempowered by that sad but true fact. We are in a sad state of dystopia, especially in regards to our food system. My point I want to make is you are responsible. And what I mean is literally break that word apart. You are able to respond to this crisis. You are some of the most privileged individuals in the entire world at amazing institutions of higher education. And you can grapple with and understand both sides of this paradox. There are very few people in the world that can bear witness to both sides. I believe that all of us in this room have, bore witness to the obesity epidemic here, or even in India, in South Asia, and we've all seen the images of malnutrition. So I do want you to be empowered by that. Of all the groups in the world, this group right here is able to respond, and therefore you are responsible. So, if I could provide 3 quick bits of it. First, become educated. Honestly, I'm not just saying this because they're right here, but read Raj's work, visit Ellen's website. They're both phenomenal, and I would tack on Michael Pollan. Amazing work to understand how this entire system comes together and affects both vulnerable populations. So just to get back to your question, I say, as a student, your resources are limited. I think as President Clinton joked about, we don't have a lot of money. So I would say first, look for opportunities to partner. Exhaust an environmental scan. Figure out what everyone else is doing with your particular idea. Look for people that are on the opposite perspective, see what people are doing differently, and learn from it. And first, seek out the partnership. In terms of challenges, it's almost generic, but funding is a challenge. And that's why, thank goodness, there are great friends of mine who decided they were able to respond, and they're doing their piece through what I've mentioned before. So I don't want to steal all the time left, so I'll end there.
You have still 3 more minutes, so.
The challenges, maybe, as a student?
Absolutely, yes, because I think that when we are, trying to come up with ideas, sometimes we can feel discouraged for the challenges and the obstacles that we can find through the way. So, and I think, the 3 of you, I'm sure that you have had your fair share of challenges and obstacles in order to bring your idea to life. So I think that, for the students, that will be so much, of a value to know or to figure out a way of how to overcome those and continue your path.
Sure. I'll be brief, and I would love to hear their thoughts on this. So I'm going to repeat, bear witness to this system. Bear witness to both sides of it and let it impact you. Embody what you see. I think, I'm going to quote a writer I really love and respect, and she says that, being a spectator to calamities taking place in different countries around the world is an essential modern experience. If you bear witness to obesity and you bear witness to the worst forms of acute malnutrition, they both become a disease of the soul, right? We're all vulnerable. We're all vulnerable to food. Food, we just have such an interesting relationship with, as you mentioned. So seriously, embody this and let this be soul work for you. And I think that will just empower you in such a way that you will overcome the challenges. You won't be able to predict all of them, but you will find a way around them.
Right. I think when I was a student, we were trying very hard to sort of push back on the constraints. I mean, there's a reason why we don't have much money at the moment. And in part, that's because of politics. The reason, for example, that in most of our universities things are getting cut is because state budgets are shrinking. We know that. But the reason that state budgets are shrinking and services are being cut is because states aren't willing to tax the rich. There are 2 ways of balancing a budget. One is to cut services and the other is to raise income. And there are plenty of rich people in this country. There are people who earn $2 million an hour. The hedge fund managers are doing very, very well at the moment. Understanding that there are always bigger choices and also political engagement that we can make does pay off in the long term. And having that bigger vision carries you through. I mean, one of the things that I was doing just over 10 years ago was protesting at the World Trade Organization, where then President Clinton was, actually, we kind of made him listen. We made him listen to the voices of the peasants who were on the streets and the workers who were on the streets. And the World Trade Organization talks kind of collapsed. And even recently, President Clinton was in the Senate offering the advice that actually food, that he had made a mistake. He was big enough to admit that he had made a mistake, that he treated, when he was president, food as a commodity, as the same sort of thing that treating it like a television set. Now, that's something that we kind of knew back on the streets in 1999 because we were accountable to movements that were fighting for change. And the thing is that we've had lots of setbacks in the 10 years since then. But having the sort of bigger vision and being accountable to a movement gives you the courage to think beyond the next year or two, to think to the 10-year horizon and the 20-year horizon. And of course, the 30 Project is about a 30-year horizon. Thinking of ourselves as bigger and longer, if you like, as individuals who aren't just here for the next quarterly return, but instead human beings who are fighting for the revolution that we may never see, to use Che Guevara. To think of ourselves as more powerful than we'd been told. I think that's something that we need to hold on to. I think that's something that gives us strength when we are living in some very dark times.
And just to close, I think something that really echoes and just a very specific call to action, because the clock is ticking, is that what we all say is a challenge, every single one of us has said this at some point of our life, is time. And one of the biggest reasons that we don't have as healthy a food system in our country, and we have the obesity epidemic that we do, is because we have refused to believe that we should spend time on eating and food. And the nature of fast food is that somehow the very substance that we put inside our bodies to regrow our cells is something that's not worth our time. And I really challenge you all. College is a really busy moment, but it never gets less busy. And especially if you guys are as engaged as you are now. There's never going to be more time. You have to make the time for the things that are important. And I personally believe, and I think we could all leave here today thinking that the choices that we make, the way we prepare our food, the way we feed food to others, our friends and our family, and eventually our kids, that is really worth our time.
Thank you very much. A round of applause for our panelists, please. And we are right on time. Where are those microphones? Let's start the questions. Let's begin. Oh, here, right there. Let's start. What's your name?
I'm Paulus.
Okay.
And I have two questions. The first one is the fact that okay, let me just give a scenario. I come from a country where women, they go to the farm, they produce the food and they sell, but the problem is they give very bad foods to the children and then sell the good foods in the market. And if you ask them why, they will tell you a very good reason. They want to raise money for their kids in school. And I want to say that the woman has the power to stop hunger and obesity, because the woman is the one who goes to the farm. The woman is the one who goes to the market to buy food for the family. And secondly, if we are talking of hunger, we can't forget the aspect of food poisoning. If a woman starves a child because she wants to raise money for the child in school, it doesn't make sense. Giving that child bad food, you're killing that child because you're saying you want to raise money to help the family. And I want to say that we can't fight hunger and obesity without involving men as well. The men have a big role to actually, be with the woman. And, because I think if the man went to the farm as well as the woman and, was part of the cultivation and stuff like that, the man will have that power. We are not saying that the man has power, but what I'm saying is if both of them decide what to produce and what to sell, then I think we will be thinking of fighting hunger in a big way. And I want to say that if we don't educate the woman on what to produce, if we don't educate the woman on how to produce, and if we don't educate the public on what to buy, then we can't go, we can't say we are fighting hunger.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Do you want to comment into?
I'll take it as the girl. Number one, I think something that's really interesting about that point is that that's the exact same thing you would hear from a woman in the United States. And that's why I'm trying to kind of, you know, propagate this argument that hunger and obesity are really about the same thing. They're about people having a really difficult time feeding nutritious food to their kids. And women in the United States would say the same thing. It's easy and it's cheaper, and I can spend money on other things for my kids if I get this Happy Meal, right? And so you're really bringing up a really important point. The second thing I want to say, though, is that something we forget when we look at traditional, or I should say conventional, solutions to solving hunger that are there today, again, unlike the work that Mark is doing in Nepal, our food aid model is really based on exporting our food system overseas. And that's based on an assumption that our food system somehow functions properly. So continuing to export the Green Revolution to countries around the world where we're promoting the growth of tons of grain and soy and corn and wheat and the same things that we grow in the United States without thinking through nutritious food systems where people can actually grow the food and eat the food that they should eat to be healthy is, again, I think a really misplaced problem that is going to maybe have, you know, one solution that eventually causes another problem.
Thank you.
Can I just also answer that? I mean, it's true that if we're serious about fighting hunger, then there is a policy that does it way better than anything else, and also helps to increase education outcomes and healthcare outcomes, and that's girls' education. If we're serious about fighting hunger, then actually we need to take the step back and think about the relations of power that are involved here. Girls' education is by far and away one of the most powerful development policies there is on the face of the earth. But I also wanted to sort of take issue with the idea that women are powerful in the situation where they're forced to choose between feeding their kids or having to send them to school. That's the devil's choice, and there's no that's a sort of constraint that in all good conscience no one can allow. If you're forced either to choose between feeding your kids bad food now so that you can send them to school later on, then that's not freedom, that's not power, that's disempowerment. And I think that, again, if we're serious about really fighting hunger, then we need to be thinking about education, but we also need to think about fighting the root cause of hunger, which is poverty.
Thank you very much. So let's go to our next question. Your name?
Hi, my name is Mariana Kotlier, and I'm a master's in public health student at Columbia University. This is my partner, Carly. And we are so thrilled that you guys are having this panel, and it's just been fantastic because this is very much the issues that we're concerned with. So my question is actually for Ellen. I saw your TED Talk, and I was actually shocked, and I blogged about it, and I said, this woman is so audacious because really people in the food movement are so afraid to tackle the political problem and really the infrastructure that's causing all of the problems that we're trying to address. People are really trying to work on sort of small on-the-ground initiatives to fight hunger and fight obesity and educate people, but not looking at how to, dismantle the policies that are in place that cause that. So I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to, the political feasibility of what you're trying to do.
First of all, crazy big food companies are going to come get me. They haven't yet. But I think there's a really important opening in the world today that I'm actually trying to exploit. And that is a very small thing. The United Nations World Food Program, where I used to be the US spokesperson, has traditionally given food, especially from the US, as the US has given, donations to the World Food Program in kind, meaning excess corn and soy shipped on US ships overseas. There was an opening about 3.5 years ago while I was at Feed and actually investing in this particular program that they started called Purchase for Progress. Purchase for Progress is the UN World Food Program's plan to buy food locally in the developing world that they wouldn't be used as food aid. So, for example, in Kenya, there's very productive Kenyan farmers that could be feeding the hungry people that exist in the slums of Kibera. That is an incredible opportunity to make a new alliance between the big food aid organizations that traditionally would have been allied with big food and big ag, the food aid organizations that would have been allies with big food and big ag. There's now an opportunity to say, hey, actually, World Food Program, you're kind of saying the same thing as Slow Food is saying in a weird, crazy way, right? And so my audacious plan is to say, if we can exploit the opportunity and the political will of people that care about hungry people all around the world, and somehow join that feeling and those talking points with all of the organizations on the ground in the United States that are promoting sustainable agriculture here and better food systems here, that is a big force that can go to Washington and can be there at the debates at the Farm Bill that can fight the other side. And that's really what I'm trying to do in a very subtle way around the dinner table, is say, you guys have a lot more in common than you think at the local level, and that's going to play out in a big way at the national and international level.
Thank you. Next question, sir, right here. Your name, please.
Hi, I'm Ezra from Willamette University, Oregon. I'm from this organization, Impact Now. So my question is going to be dealing with the I part, because Raj talked about a very interesting thing, the political aspect. I think I find it to be a very, like a major uphill battle, having to resolve the political issues. And I think from your experience, you talked about your struggle starting in 1999. I think there's also something that I can do right now, and that's what my organization is about. We're trying to find a way to deal with the problem right now on the ground. So we're working with the community in Ethiopia where food insecurity is major, but we're trying to find a way. And then you talked about how there are some places where they are very productive, they can produce and they can self-support themselves, and then transfer the excesses and the extra to other parts. Now, the question is, how do you balance the political fight you want to do and deal with the political issues that strangle or that is a bottleneck out there, but still do the necessary work today, so that me and everybody here can go home and know exactly what to do and start doing the work, start impacting today. You know?
You want to take it?
You organize. I mean, I'm very sympathetic to the idea that, look, this is such a huge issue. You've got the Farm Bill, and you've got the World Bank over there, and you've got, Walmart doing all kinds of crazy stuff, and so all of a sudden it feels I'm just one person. What can I do? And if we succumb to that, if we are just one person, then we don't have enough time in the day, even with the best will in the world, to enjoy our food and organize against the Farm Bill and make sure that people are fed in our communities and do half a dozen other things. But together we can. And that's been one of one of the organizations that I have a lot of time for is an organization called the MST, and they're based in Brazil, the Brazilian Landless Rural Workers Movement. Now, what they do is a range of things. They have folk who are working on occupying land so that people have land on which to grow food. They have people who are delegates to fighting the World Trade Organization. They have people who lobby the government. They have people who petition the government to have things sent to them. And it seems to me that a strategy that works well is one where we recognize that there are lots and lots of challenges. And we need to address them all. We can't address them all individually, but we can when we organize and when we're part of organizations. And so the MST takes on everything from tackling the World Trade Organization to having gender workshops so that men become less sexist. All of this is necessary, but it's not something you can do alone, but you can do it together.
We have 1 more minute for one more question. Quickly, question and answer, please.
Hi, my name is Carly Bird. Our commitment is Cook for Health, and we're teaching medical providers how to cook healthy, affordable meals in hopes that they're going to be able to convey information about food to their patients rather than just nutrition information. But that aside, I'm wondering if you guys can comment on the kind of piecemeal, fragmented approach of the food movement. Right now, there's really no large institutional basis for it, and I'm wondering how these small grassroots organizations can have a political voice when there's so many of them and they're all fighting for the same funding. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean that's Thank you for that, because that's exactly what sort of, I've seen a lot of the same issues, and again, I'm trying to bring the international and the domestic together, and really the idea that I've come up with is to rally around a vision for what a better food system looks like. Because I think if you ask people that are fighting hunger in the trenches, and you ask people that are fighting obesity in the trenches, when it boils down, they're both going to say the same thing. People need access to nutritious foods, and that will help solve the problem. Now, people also, on top of that, layered on top of that, need education and need some health care and going back to learning how to cook. I mean, home ec classes, people. I mean, really, and I it's there's obviously a lot of other layers to the problem, but I think by giving people a vision for what a better food system would look like, both at the local level, then at the regional level, then at the national level, then at the international level, the problems and the solutions are quite similar. People in Malawi need the same solutions as people in the South Bronx, as people in Manhattan, because it's just as hard to go out of your door and find a place that sells reasonably priced, nutritious foods that you can feed your family anywhere in the world.
Thank you very much. This closes our Q&A session.